Hello, folks. We're going to be getting going here in just a minute. Thank you for dialing in. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Give me 1 second here. Okay, I've got to get Andre and Kenny on here. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to just take a little pause. Everybody take a sip of water. And I'll be right there.
Hey.
Hey, you made it. Hold on. We've got people live.
Awesome.
And we're getting Andre on as we speak. Oh, Andre, you're on. It was Andre. So I'm getting Kenny on as we speak.
we're interchangeable.
I wasn't looking. I was diligently doing my email. Thank you for jumping on. We are live, and there's Kenny as Andre.
Kenny's gotten a huge upgrade.
I can actually change that here in a second. Well, listen, guys, why don't we begin?
That's Al Gore used to not be able to tell us apart either. He would just.
Hey, Kenny,
you're muted. We're missing your.
Kenny,
Al Gore thought he had one bespectacled, overeducated Jewish speechwriter for 8 years. It was the same person.
Let me see if I'm renaming you on here, so everyone will know who you are, Kenny.
Correct.
Kenneth. I have to get Kenneth right.
Ken is fine.
Hey, Kenneth.
I've corrected myself. Okay, so we're going to begin. We've got folks getting on. I appreciate you both being here today. And so thanks, guys. Listen, this is a special event for me that was generated. It began with the idea of Simon Rosenberg from NDN here from my bedroom in Northwest Washington, D.C. on a beautiful spring day. The idea for this event came about because just a few weeks ago, the New York Times wrote a remarkable story about the impact that Democracy Journal has had on the thinking of the Democratic Party since its inception more than 15 years ago, but particularly on the Biden administration and how many of the senior Biden staff and Biden cabinet officials had used Democracy Journal as a place to sort of toss out ideas, which was the whole goal, I think, for Andre and Kenny back in many years ago. And it was really just a great testament to a really, really vital and important project in our family. We see how much money is spent in politics every year, and this is an impact. This is a project that for very little money has had a very outsized impact. And I hope that what we're going to be able to talk about today is just some of the how it came about, their reflections back all these years later on the magazine itself, and also on what's happened to the center left in the Democratic Party. I mean, in any way that you feel comfortable about the journey that, frankly, we've been on together. I mean, I met both of you at very early ages. Andre, we first met when you were still in college. And I remember you even calling me one day to ask whether or not you should take a job with Al Gore or another politician who had been courting you at the time.
I remember that conversation.
And Kenny, we met when you were writing your book when you were still in grad school. But anyway, we'll talk more. I want to get to you guys and just thank you for being here. Thanks to the audience that's with us today as part of this weekly series that we do now and part of this new Zoom COVID age. Every Tuesday at 1, we have a conversation with a thought leader and interesting people. And here we are with Kenny and Andre today. And so I want to kick it to you guys. I mean, whoever wants to go first.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about how this all started and what the impetus for this was and how did this come about, Kenny?
Sure, yeah, I'll start, Ken Baer. And so I think we have to go back in time a bit to remember the sort of the disappointment at the end of the 2004 election. You know, it was seen as a given that you would have a president that was elected without receiving majority of the popular vote, that he would lose re-election. It was also seen, and so like that, and also, and then the sort of the antipathy towards George W. Bush was so intense among Democrats, and not just around the Iraq War, but just the whole administration, because of really, I think of the election of 2000, which Andre and I were both very involved in through our work with Vice President Gore. And so going into 2004, we then lose the election, right? And there was all sorts of diagnoses, if people remember. It was outright stolen, right? There was some sort of nefarious something going on with voting machines or something. There is something about, that we really just weren't communicating the right way. Karl Rove had some masterful way of using new technologies to reach voters. I remember at the time that there was a whole article about the ability to target people on the internal TV channels at gyms, and like how this was genius, and like how this was the type of micro-targeting the world would go to. Things of that sort, and obscure cable channels. And then there was a whole thing about, well, there's nothing wrong with what Democrats were saying, we just said it the wrong way. And there was a linguist who was became quite popular, George Lakoff, wrote a whole book about like, it's just about how we're framing it. And, I think Andre wrote, actually, I think you wrote a piece in the New York Times, Andre, right? Like right after that. And you were saying, no, that actually there's something just, we're not speaking to the times. And I think that really resonated with me as well, and partly thinking that, of what the country had just gone through in these opening years of the 21st century, that there's so much change happening, 9/11 being really one of the most prominent ones, but other ones with technology, with demography, with things we're seeing in the economy, that we owed upon ourselves with these values that mattered, if we really believed in giving everyone an equal shot at a better life, if we really believed in a diverse society, really believed in democracy, really believed in all these kind of fundamental principles, there needed to be a rethinking. And that it's too facile an explanation to say, nah, it was just like, it was a badly run campaign or this or that and the other thing. And it may have been, right? Like I won't take there is something to be said about the execution of politics. But it felt like there's something more. And so Andre and I met at a pub that was on downtown Washington called Mackey's. And we sat down, and he said, what we really need is we need something to incubate these ideas. We really need to start like a journal, a magazine. And both of us knew the history of the neoconservatives and the conservative movement's own rebirth in the late 60s and really into the 70s and into the 80s, the Reagan era, around journals such as The Public Interest and Commentary that really incubated ideas like supply side economics. It's a wrong idea, but it was an idea, right? It was a new way of looking at the world. Ideas like Gene Kirkpatrick famously, was just a political science professor, wrote a whole article called Dictatorships and Double Standards in her commentary, which, was about a whole new way of engaging the world. And there's many examples of this. And so Andre said, well, this needs to be done. Who's going to do it? And we both kind of looked at each other. So I guess we have to do it, right? Like it's a kind of us, and so with the sort of the moxie that comes with people who are in their late 20s at the time, we just said, okay, we're gonna go do it, right? And we talked to people like Simon, like, oh, Simon, how do we do this? And like, how do you start something new, and one thing led to the other. It led to a memo and a PowerPoint deck, and next thing you know, we were able to find both really key intellectual supporters, so people like Bill Galston and like Kmark and then E.J. Dionne, who agreed with us and decided to get the thing off the ground. The last thing I'll say is just what we tried to set up to do. And it really was it was something that whatever political beliefs Andre and I had, our belief was that was irrelevant. It was not about pushing an agenda. The only thing you had to buy into was the idea that new times demanded new thinking, and that the thinking of not only the 1930s or 1960s, but also the 1990s of the Clinton Gore years had to be rethought. That we couldn't just go back to the same solutions to today's problems. And no matter where you fell on as long as you agreed with that, you could be in our pages. And what we wanted to do is have a place where new ideas could be put forward, new policies we put forward, and they could be debated. And we really wanted that debate. We were, and then take those debates and maybe put those both in sort of the real world context, have events. At the time, so there was no social media, but the blogosphere was taking off, and in many ways we were a reaction to the blogosphere. They needed more concerted and longer and more thoughtful pieces, but you also needed them to engage. And then things that were good ideas, we wanted to use the political skills that we learned up until that point to help drive those ideas into the political mainstream. So if there was an idea for like, how do you regulate financial products? Well, how do we get that to members of Congress? How do we get that to political campaigns looking for ideas so they can get going? And so that was like so that way we had people even in the very first issue with whom we go back to the old sort of new dem, old dem fights of the 90s. They were definitely on the other side of it, but we didn't care. Like, it was very important that you just had to buy into this idea that someone was different. And I think that was baked into the DNA of it. I'll stop there. Andre, want to add anything?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. I think, as Simon said, we got to know each other, all the three of us, originally through the New Democrat movement back in the 1990s, and that set of arguments that were going on in the party. And I first met Simon when he was at the DLC, and then I ended up working in the DLC, and Kenny wrote a book about the DLC, and then of course all went off and did other things. But to Kenny's point, our belief in starting democracy was that those old arguments of the 1990s or of the 1980s or of the 1960s were no longer relevant to the world we lived in post 9/11, in an economy that was changing rapidly, in a society that was changing rapidly, but that ideas still mattered. And that was, of course, one of the beliefs that Simon brought into building what was NDN. Rob Shapiro's on the line. Another person who was a huge inspiration to us and a godfather of this movement. And we believed that there needed to be a next set of ideas. For me, the germ of democracy was in a specific moment. And I remember that moment. It was the second debate between Bush and Kerry, and happened to be in Tempe, Arizona, where I live in Arizona. And Bob Schieffer was the moderator, and he asked Bush and Kerry this question about what would you say to an unemployed steelworker in Ohio whose job is disappearing? And Bush gave this answer about, well, you need to go get retrained and go get a new career, and unlikely that that's going to be the complete answer for a 50-something-year-old steelworker for most people. And then Kerry gave this answer about, well, we're going to have a tax credit that's going to get rid of outsourcing. And I had been part of the Kerry campaign for a big chunk of that campaign, and had been involved in putting together a policy. And just hearing him say it made me realize how empty it was. And not that it was a bad idea, but that it really was not an idea of that would speak to the scale of the challenges we are facing. And fast forward a couple months later, a few weeks later, and Kerry barely loses president. And if he had won Ohio, he would have been president. And if we had gotten a few more of those unemployed steelworkers to vote for him, he would have won the presidency. And so there was a direct line between our failure on the ideas front to come up with ideas that met the challenge we were living in across the board, and our electoral failure. And to Kenny's point, yes, all kinds of things we needed to do in rebuilding our electoral strength as a party, and Democracy Alliance was coming up, and NDN was working on that, and a lot of other things. But that we also needed an ideas renaissance, and needed a set of ideas where we would be able to respond to the times, and a place where you could have the Rob Shapiros and the Bill Galstons and the Lane Kmarks speak to everybody else in the party, and that we could hash things out and have real arguments with one another around first principles and ideas, and come to something that would be a set of policies, but even more so a set of principles that would be able to address the times we're living in. And so that was for Ken and I the charge that we gave ourselves as we first started building democracy.
And listen, I want to just say, I forgot to do in the introduction that, Kenny, you're now running a company called Crosscut Strategies, which is a firm, a public affairs firm here in Washington. And Andrei, you're the leader of a new financial services firm called Aspiration, right? And which is doing remarkable things. And you're being able to live in a beautiful place out in Arizona, and a place that we love to visit. And I just wanted to make sure I covered that before we continued. And I just reflecting on one thing, Andrei, that you said, is that it really is remarkable how much during that period from 2003 to sort of 2006 or so, there was a sort of big bang of reinvention of institutional capacity in the family. The Democracy Alliance, which I was involved in creating, Center for American Progress, Media Matters, NDN kind of rebooted, and became more of a thinky place than a political place. And Third Way began during that period, and it was, and you did too. And it was, there was this sense in the air, right, that we needed to reboot, what we were doing and to do it better. And having the loss in 2004 was crushing. But looking back now, right, if I can go to both of you maybe to talk back. So here we are all these years later. How did you do? I mean, do you think democracy has had the impact that you hoped? What are some of the highlights during that period? How is our thinking brain of the center left here today doing? I mean, what's your assessment? Kenny, let me just go to you.
Yeah, I'll take on part of that. So part of our mission was, how do we identify talent and sort of get people who probably didn't know that they had an outlet. And that was both to hire and put them in an internship or hire them. And then also people to write for us. And then do those ideas go on and matter? So it's actually very satisfying. Like our first managing editor, Clay Risen, is now a senior editor at the New York Times. Ethan Porter, guy we hired at a college, went on to get his doctorate. He's a tenure track professor at GW, has written some really important books about public policy. Things of that sort of really satisfying that we kind of incubated. We had, I think, another intern ran for office, or a couple have, or served in the administration. So that's been great. But what's really been satisfying are people who both, were kind of just starting out in the ideas place, giving a place to really talk about it. That, as that article in the New York Times talked about, Jake Sullivan wrote for Democracy, Ron Klain wrote a bunch for Democracy. You can go up and down and across the administration of people who would put forward their ideas, and also not just the Biden administration, but the Obama administration as well. And then there's also our most famous sort of like the case study of this is with Elizabeth Warren, who, it was very proactive. I think Andrei kind of knew her. from some Kerry stuff, and she was, she had written a popular, a non-academic book already, but is still just a pretty, not well-known Harvard Law professor. And we would go through and look through all, like, public policy faculties, law faculties, find people who seemed to be writing something that was a little more accessible and more. And we approached her and said, so what are you thinking about these days? And she said, I got this idea. I really think it's incredible that we have regulations of consumer products, but not consumer financial products. Really could destroy people. And I've done all this work on it, and it's leading to this bankruptcy problem, et cetera. We said, oh, great, why don't you write that up? And like, this became the idea that became the the CFPB, Consumer Financial Products Bureau. I remember at the time, I remember turning to Andre and being like, I don't think this is a great idea. It was just like,
this has been recorded, Kenny.
Yeah, no, like, I've been upfront, but like at the time I didn't, but it didn't matter if I thought it was a good idea. I thought it was a valid idea, right? Like, and it ended up being one that became a very timely idea and has done a lot of good. And so that's just like a great example of, yes, I think the impact has been made. That's what that article talked about. Right now I'm blanking on some of the other like pieces. There's one piece that's just really obscure, and this guy who wrote it actually is now a big energy expert, Jason Bordoff, who has just been named one of the co-deans of Columbia University's new climate school. He wrote a piece, probably 15 years ago for Democracy. He says, it'd be incredible. We have the technology now. We can bill people for their car insurance based on how many miles they actually ride, and has all these sort of other effects and why it's a good idea. And it seemed like a crazy idea. Like, why is this even a big policy idea? And then it's actually like, you see it advertised all the time now, right? And I always kid him about that he could have left academia and policy and started a great insurance company. Andre?
Yeah, I think, Simon, to your question, a couple things I think are important to focus on. One is Kenny and I are the proud co-parents of democracy, but to your point, also have gone off and done other things, and for the 15 years of democracy, Mike Tomasky has been the editor of the past 12, and so and he and all the people who've been part of that staff have, I think, done an amazing job, and so I think we get to quell over what we helped give birth to, but also it's been the hard work over the past decade plus has been from others, Mike leading the charge there. And so looking back though over that whole history, how have we done? I have to give us a pretty good grade, but an incomplete one, in the sense of going back to, as Kenny described, what we were setting out to do. We were able to do some of those things, able to take ideas that were either non-existent, like what became the CFPB, or ones that were really well off of the set of what was seen as possible from people, and inject them into the discourse, inject them into the public debate, and to bring those ideas to the fore, but also bring people to the fore. You look at a Jean Kirkpatrick, who became who she became because of that one article. Certainly cannot claim the same credit around Elizabeth Warren, but going back to what Kenny said about us using some of the skills that we had developed in the political world, we really believe that when we came up with the ability to find a author who had a really great idea, the same way we had with Warren, it was important not just to publish it, not just to put it out in a journal, but to really build a campaign around it. And so when we published Warren's article, we also put resources behind a PR campaign around it, and got remember this, Gretchen Morgenstern, then for the New York Times, to write about it for the Sunday business section, and that was a big deal. I remember Warren being calling us or emailing us ecstatic about that we were able to get her on CNN, and she thought that was super cool that CNN was going to be interviewing her about this article. Now, I think Elizabeth Warren would have become Elizabeth Warren were it not for us. But but her and then others who are now in positions in the Biden administration and other key positions, I think we were able to give a platform to, and that was an important part of it. I'd say, though, the work of creating a consensus around big ideas in the party and in our politics is something that is continuing, and I don't think we reach an endpoint on that. I do believe that there's more consensus now uh, in the center left and in the Democratic Party than there was in years past, and democracy plays a tiny role in that, and would love to uh, maybe have some of that conversation with you and some of the others who are part of this today about whether that's true. But for all of the disagreements and battles between the Bernie folks and the Biden Hillary um, side of the party, um, I think there really is a lot more basic consensus around how we see the world, and maybe arguments around positioning or scale rather than fundamental questions. And part of why I think Biden has been successful thus far, and I think is going to be successful, is because he and the team around him have really been able to bring together all aspects of the party around something where a Joe Manchin and a Bernie Sanders can 90% see eye to eye, and can then have a debate about whether the corporate tax rate should be 25 or 28, but not about, should there be welfare reform, should there be NAFTA, and some of these greater fissures. And again, consensus is oftentimes a positive, and can sometimes be a negative in a party and in a movement, and that's part of what I think we all have to think about. But that's definitely was something that we really wanted to help bring about as we thought about democracy.
I'm going to ask one more thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. And this has been great. And in most of these conversations, usually, I think we may end up going to 2 o'clock if you guys can do it. I think there's so much here, and you put so much on the table. But one thing, I do this presentation these days every Friday called "With Democrats, Things Get Better," and it's sort of a meditation back on our politics going back to the end of the Cold War and the beginning of all of this, right? The New Democrats, and how, NDN was New Leaders for a New Time when we started in 1996. And what I show in the presentation through data is that, since the Cold War ended and this new age of globalization began, that, Democrats have governed very well. We've created lots of jobs. The Republicans have repeatedly failed to modernize and to govern when they've been in power. And that the contrast between a successful center left that's governed and left the country better than we found it, and has also now won more votes in 7 out of 8 national elections, that we really are the most successful center left project. The Democratic Party is the most important and successful center left party in the developed world. I mean, that the success that we've had during this age has been remarkable. And I think because of our media and C3 organizations, academia, we can't really be as honest about how successful we've been and what an utter incredible failure they've been on the other side. And I think that as we look to Europe, and as Joe Biden looks to, sort of re-enter the world around a value-based agenda, this idea of the success of the Democrats and the center left, which we've all been part of this project, right, is something I think we have to popularize more. And for all the things that we feel that have been undone, that we haven't been able to do yet, Andre, I share your sense that, man, there's still some big things we got to do. I hope that we can together also all, celebrate the fact, when you look back, Kenny, from when you wrote your book, right? I mean, the difference between what the Democratic Party felt like in the late 80s and what it feels like now is just, it's, night and day. I mean, Reagan had come in on his white horse and saved the country. And for a lot of older Americans, the story that they grew up with was a once great Democratic Party failure. Reagan saves the country. And now we have a very different narrative for younger people. It's a Republican Party that's not really spoken to them in ways and not been successful in their governing, and a Democratic Party that's been pretty good, during this time. And so I just wonder, as both of you have have a global view. I mean, what's your sense about the democratic thing now and how we should be thinking about it? Should we be giving ourselves more credit for having done well? Should we be disappointed in the things that we haven't been able to do? I mean, what's your assessment? Both of you have been really important parts of this, big conversation, right?
Well, thanks. I think for me, it's interesting, Simon. No less a political strategist than Rahm Emanuel made that same argument and in a column recently, about 6 weeks ago, where he said, I don't understand why Democrats just talk down their past and the achievements, whereas Republicans don't. They always talk about how great Reagan was, all the things they have for 40 years, whereas you have elements within the Democrat coalition who see Obama as a failure, see Clinton as an abject failure. They see the whole thing as a failure, and they just keep talking about that. Whereas, as you point out, actually, the party's been extremely robust on a national level, especially as compared to the era that preceded it, and compared to the globally. Compared to the what happened to the Labor Party or other center left parties around the world, who've been incredibly successful. I never even thought about it that way. That's actually is quite remarkable. Now, there's institutional reasons why that popularity of that success hasn't translated into larger margins in the House, et cetera, or whatnot, but more power. But it's an important thing, and I don't know why, and I think it's from a pure tactical explanation. It makes no sense not to, as a party, we should be saying, look at all we've accomplished so far, and look what we can continue to accomplish, as opposed to the idea of like, oh, it was a failure, like it didn't really work, and now we could fix it. Which is not true at all.
Yeah, I'm a little less sanguine than the two of you. Look, we are meeting today, the day after Walter Mondale passed away, and this is not a party that is losing 49 of 50 states, and we are a party that is where the majority of the country is, and have been for arguably the past 3 decades since 1992, and have lost only in elections that have been stolen by the Russians, stolen by the Supreme Court, and in super squeakers in 2004. So we are the majority party for the past more than generation. And given that we don't have enough to show for it, do we have a much better track record than the Republicans? Yes. Have we come in and pulled the country's out of the fire in 2008 and now, of course, post-Trump? Yes, and we've been a very effective cleanup crew, and I guess in 1992 after Reagan Bush as well. And so we've dug ourselves out of a hole and done better than that in both the Clinton Gore years and the Obama Biden years, and now will again. But we're also a country where we have a middle class that's disappearing, and a inequality of wealth and opportunity that's bigger than arguably any other time in our country's history, and a planet that is literally self-destructing and having an impact on the lives of billions of people. And that's been part of our agenda, and I don't think you can give America a great grade on those core elements of economic opportunity and global security. Despite our electoral success, and despite our policy success, and despite the strength of our ideas.
Well, let me open it up to questions, gang. There's 2 ways you can jump in here. All of us are Zoom veterans now. You can raise your hand and I can bring you into the conversation, or you can just type a question in the Q&A box. And let me just say, it's good to see both you guys. I haven't seen either of you in person in a long time. And it's just nice to be with both of you today.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Mark Schmidt, an old friend of all of ours, right? Not a question, but I have to hop off and wanted to say how excellent this session was. I'm writing something right now arguing that we should take the recent history of the center left more seriously rather than endlessly obsessing about the Powell memo and ALEC. And this was a strong affirmation that my argument was right. Congrats to all of you, and hope to catch up when we're out of Zoom world. Best, Mark. And
anytime we can affirm Mark Schmidt's arguments, I consider that a successful day.
And we should all follow up with Mark separately, and I'll get you guys his current email. But he's right, and I'll find that article from Rom, Kenny. I didn't, or if you have it, you want to send it, I can post it up on the site. And okay, any other comments, questions, suggestions, thoughts? Anybody? We had a nice contribution from Mark. I know there's some old friends here. Rob, I was hoping Rob was going to jump in, and Rob, I
tried to goad him into doing so.
I know, Rob, I think you have to jump in here, Rob. It's great to have you. And Rob Shapiro, all of our longtime collaborator, friend, instigator. Rob, take it away.
First of all, it's great to see both of you guys again. And I see Simon regularly on Zoom, but I don't get to see either Kenny or Andre very often. And it's a pleasure, even though being called a godfather does remind me of my gray hair. And,
at least we didn't call you the Godfather. So.
That's true. I am struck by, the Biden administration had entered office in the midst of a crisis, and it is not only appropriate, but necessary that its agenda address that crisis. And the crisis seems to be being addressed in two ways. One is the pandemic relief and the the vaccination operation. Totally right thing to do. And what he was elected to do. And the second is there is, I think, really broad and positive investment in a range of forms of infrastructure, which will help the economy over the long term. It'll create jobs, but its impact on incomes should be seen in 5 to 10 years anyway. But nothing else serious about the underlying problems that have emerged again in US productivity, which is to say US incomes. That has not been part of the agenda yet. It would require both a new approach to innovation, which requires a lot of thinking, and that we have not been doing, or the party has not been doing, and to education and training. And on education, I think it's great to have free community college. 21 states already have it. So this is, something of, but it's good to extend it to 50. But the fact is that the gap in income between those with an associate degree and those with a high school education is relatively modest. There is a large gap, much larger gap between those with an associate degree and those with a bachelor's degree. And an even greater gap between those with a bachelor's degree and those with a professional or graduate degree. But taking on that is different from just giving everybody money. It pits state institutions against public institutions and other constituencies within the party. And I understand that's difficult. I also understand as an economist that what we've done will do very little to raise people's incomes beyond the checks they get from the government. And I hope that democracy will provide a forum to try to advance our thinking in those areas.
First of all, speaking for myself, but I'm sure speaking for Mike Domatsky as well, would love to get you to write something on that, and so we should talk about that. And I think, Rob, what you're saying is similar to what I was saying as well. I think we do have some really gaping long-term challenges still as a country around inequality of opportunity, around inequality of wealth, and education. We all know is a key driver of that, and thinking about what that innovation agenda does look like, so that we have a less bifurcated 21st century economy than we've had, and able to bring back the kind of upward mobility we saw in the 20th century without trying to bring back the economy of the 20th century. You're also right, I think, to point out to the variance in different states. My friend Bill Rowe is on as well, and we in Arizona see how different some of the approaches are in places like Arizona versus other places as well. And so I think the federal government does have a role to set national standards and understand how we drive a national economy, while different states are going to find their own paths as well. But yeah, I think we have a real consensus that has been building in the party, and again, we don't have the same kinds of knockdown, drag out fights that we used to have around charter schools and that we used to have around labor and so on. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be having fights, and maybe those are not the right fights to be having right now, and not the fights that are appropriate for this moment. But we need to be pushing the battle, and again, that's going back to what we were talking about originally. Part of what we wanted to create with democracy was a place where we could really have fundamental questions being not just debated, but hashed out. And one of the things we built in to the format of democracy was not just arguments, but that there would be responses, and that we would go out and we'd find somebody to say, here's an article we just published, write something that argues for why this is absolutely positively wrong. And engendering those debates, I think, is important.
Kenny, anything to add? You know, it's my just firm belief that, as we were talking about earlier, that one of the reasons we have been successful is that there has been smart investments. There have been entrepreneurs and smart investments in a whole huge array of institutions in our family, you know, and as we were discussing earlier, it's so, when I've traveled to Europe and I've gone abroad, it's just amazing how little kind of intellectual infrastructure there often is, how little work that can be done outside the party. The parties are very strong, and we have this very kind of weak party system, frankly, right? And it's been remarkable. It's one of the reasons that, you know, I went back and looked. When you guys launched, I was on the original advisory board. NDN actually sent out a lot of emails promoting the launch of the magazine.
Totally.
You know, I didn't remember this, right? And in part because I was so excited about another piece of the infrastructure, another piece of the family, right? Another, you know, because I believed, like Rob does, I mean, this idea around innovation, it just has to be bottom up. I mean, it can't be something that's, you know, we've all learned this. But anyway, let me see if there are any other, we do have another question here from Peter Capel. I have a concern that the problem with highlighting the successes of the Democratic policies taking hold is a failure to counter the Republican trolling. Do you agree? I think what Peter's asking is whether or not, you know, we've allowed Republicans basically for too long to define the terms of the debate, is what I would, sort of how I would interpret that. And I just, it would be interesting for both of you to reflect, you know, on this battle of ideas, and that, you know, we, you know, for example, let me give you an example. Peter was on a presentation. Despite our success in managing the economy, 34 million jobs over 2 presidents, the Republicans have created 2 million jobs over 3 Republican presidents, and there's a lot of other data. on the question of who would be better for the economy, Trump beat Biden by 12 points in this election, right? And it still remains shocking to me. And if you look at polling, the question around Biden's, on COVID, he's up in the 60s. His personal approval is in the mid to high 50s. On the economy, he's in the high 40s, low 50s. So his economic numbers are still substantially below his. Andrei, you sort of were addressing this, right? Is there a sense that, we haven't figured out, as good as we are, right? Have we not sold the American people that we really have solutions for these core economic, problems that you were describing?
Well, I think there's two things. I think one is the question to which the level to which we do have answers. And I think that's part of what Rob was highlighting, was there's a lot of things I think we still don't have a real set of answers about, or don't have a strong enough set of answers, or don't have enough consensus around a set of answers. The second part of it, though, is our ability to tell the story about what we have done. And for reasons that, Simon, you've tracked and enunciated better than anybody else out there, Democrats are held wrongly to a different bar than anybody else, by the media, by just the general population at large, by ourselves. And you see that already, I think, popping up in these early days of the Biden administration, where whatever the controversy of the day is in the media and in the echo machine of the right, are things that would not have been a 5-second controversy in the Trump years, because whatever was actually happening that day was so much worse. That's commonly called the tan suit problem, and we just see that playing out. And you see the Biden administration in its personnel moves and others responding to pressure when we just left an administration that had no compunction about having people in place who are looting the country, breaking the law on a daily basis, saying outrageous things, and look, and then our friend Neera Tanden doesn't get approved as OMB director because she had some tweets that were seen as mean, that paled in comparison to anything on any given day that the President of the United States and all of his henchmen and women did for 4 years. And so we're held to a different bar. And again, you've been the leader in talking about this, and yet I don't know that we have a real answer for how we are able to combat that.
I'll tackle another part of that, which kind of the polling question you're talking about, Simon. Because I think this is the crossroads. This is kind of that we're not, just as in 2005, Andrei and I were saying, hey, listen, it's not the 1990s. It's 2021. It's not 2005 anymore. And a lot has happened in the politics and also in the world and in people's lives and where the country is. I think that, to me, the fundamental analysis about the 2016 election is coming to the realization is that what Donald Trump did was something that Republicans never could really do, which is he successfully ran to the left on economics, to the Democratic nominee, and he ran hard to the right on cultural national issues, which Republicans have done in the past. And he did it to a degree that he's able to then give a choice to a certain group of voters, which actually aligned to what they were looking for. So just to illustrate that, recall what Mitt Romney lost on was that he was seen as a plutocrat, out of touch with people, a Richie Rich, a guy who had an elevator for his car. So it could go on and on. Trump, despite all of his,
he has a golden toilet.
It literally had a golden toilet. He was able to position himself on trade, even on entitlements, in a strange way to the left of the Democratic nominee. And there's a lot of it. So in that world, then we're sort of in this world now where Biden arguably was able to take a lot of that back on both those sort of issue axes, but it hasn't gone back fully. And what we're seeing in the Republican Party is kind of an internal battle, a serious one of them trying to figure out, are they going to go down the road of where Trump has laid out, which was successful for one person in one election, I mean, or are they going to try to get back to what they see as their roots? And how that gets settled is where all the kind of the partisan action is, so to speak. Like that's where you see people with jumping between party and party until it settles. This is where the kind of the flux is going to come from as we look ahead, and which is interesting. And so obviously the opportunity for being partisan Democrats is, well, how we can construct an issue agenda and a philosophy which really can grab a whole bunch of people, much bigger than we ever could, because they're shaken loose, or because their home party has changed. Or you can move in a way which actually enables the other party, if they figure it out first, to go after those people that are in flux.
Let me just one question, and then we're going to wrap up. Is Mike Tomasky is going to become the editor of the New Republic, right? That's been announced. Is he going to stay as editor of Democracy?
He is, yeah. He's always had a second job. He was doing the Daily Beast before he was running the U.S. Guardian. So he's going to he believes he is going to be able to do both, and excited for him to be able to take one part of his brain and do that at the New Republic and another part at Democracy.
It's amazing. It's he wrote a review of my With Democrats presentation where he really gave it a rave review and said, I don't know why all the stuff that's in here isn't more commonly known. Mike's an old dear friend, and it's great to hear that he's staying with Democracy. So let me close by asking you both a question, and then you can use this to sort of wrap up. Is that, what are you most excited about that Joe Biden's doing right now? I mean, when you look at this, he's doing so much, right? This is a robust, vigorous enterprise, right? They staffed up early. They had he's been doing this a long time, right? There are many of our friends who've been part of this intellectual debate are in there, finally getting to do things they've wanted to work on for a long time. I mean, what's either the most important thing you think that he's doing right now, the most interesting? I mean, just reflect on something that really captures your interest about Biden, what's happening, and then use that in any way to sort of give your final thoughts.
I'll say is I just got my second shot today, and so I use that as a metaphor of really it's just coming in and saying, like, we have a national scale crisis the federal government was missing. And to come in and just run that process, it's literally about the health and welfare of us. Like it doesn't get more basic than that. The ability to feel like you then can go out and live your life, and they could send your kids to school, right? You can do all the things that you want to do, and that is just like the first thing. And if Biden does nothing else, the fact that he's able to say, okay, we got COVID under control and America is able to keep going, that was everything else on top of that doesn't matter. I mean, there's also a lot of interesting, amazing things, but that to me is the most important thing, is getting us back on our feet. And all that entails making sure that when there's a hurricane that comes, or earthquake that happens, or a fire that happens, the government will be there to help in a way to keep us safe. And that fear maybe other people had, but I know I had of, man, I knew Trump was crazy and out of control, but now, like in a year ago at this point, like, man, like I actually am afraid to live my life like this. How is this going to end? And where can you go to get away from it? And that fear, thankfully, is dissipating and gone, and Biden is giving the way out.
I agree. I think that demonstration of competence and the ability of government to do big things successfully and ethically buys us a lot of credibility and trust to go out and do other things. The other thing I would point to that I think is really important is the the joining of a climate change agenda and an economic building and innovation agenda together. And that is not only something that gives me a lot of hope around how we can confront the existential challenge that we're facing as a society and as a civilization, but that we can do so in a way that drives economic growth, that drives rising standards of living, that drives the productivity increases that Rob was referencing. And if we're able to both confront that threat and do so in a way that jumpstarts a 21st century economy and innovation, then that's going to be an incredible achievement.
Well, you know, Kamala Harris was at she did an event yesterday in High Point, North Carolina, not exactly, San Francisco, California. And it was about a company that makes electric school buses. And it was about the electrification of school buses in America. And I've been to High Point. My son, who was a baseball player, we traveled all over the Eastern Seaboard, and I spent a weekend in High Point. And it was exactly what you're saying, Andre. I mean, I thought this event, this was such a refreshing thing for me as somebody who we, NDN, was put out a whole paper on, Rob and I wrote a whole essay in 2008 about the need for clean infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And we're part of that discussion in the early Obama days. And it's great to see them actually really following through on this. And the key now is going to be to make sure that Congress doesn't eat up the big idea the way it did, frankly, in 2009. I think some of the big structural things we tried to do got chewed up by a congressional process the administration is going to have to be very disciplined about. Let me just bring it to a close and say thanks to both of you. I think that I'm very proud of the work that the two of you have done. I'm very proud of when I look back at my time in this business, and my wife keeps wondering when I'm going to get a real job, and my kids don't really know what I do every day. But I look back on this, and the reason I'm still doing this is that I think that Democrats have been the most organized force for good in human history, and that the world that we built coming out of World War II around the four freedoms has created more freedom and opportunity for people around the world than any other system that's ever been devised. We did that. Our party did that. It wasn't, and we are now, I think, being called again under new circumstances where the battle between democracy and autocracy which has been the ancient American battle, is a battle that we have to rejoin again. And I'll close by saying that the thing I'm most excited about in the Biden administration is their willingness to take that on. This clear understanding that this is a battle that's worth fighting, that preserving democracy here at home and also advancing it around the world is something that's so intrinsic to being American that I think Biden is tapping into a sense of patriotism. He has the ability to tap into a sense of patriotism, and something and where we can reclaim patriotism on the center left in a way that we lost in the 1960s, that will make this party very muscular and robust, as we go forward. It's also the work that has to get done. Yeah. And I will tell you that I'm very proud of Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken and all of our friends for taking this on and not shirking the responsibility, right, that's been given to us. I think the fragility of our system was made very clear to us over the last 4 years, right? Yeah. And so, I close that way because it's the name of your magazine, right? Which is that democracy and this battle for democracy and revitalizing it and keeping it fresh, is at the end of the day, the core battle, right, that we all are in. And thank you guys, both of you, for waging it so effectively, so successfully, and contributing so much to this debate. And maybe we can get together every few months. It's good to see both of you.
Love that.
Kenny, congratulations.
Thank you for pulling us all together.
Yes,
thank you,
thanks.
As you said, for being there from day one of democracy and being a big part of building that and the success that we had early on, and of course for being a friend and guide for many years even before that too.
Absolutely.
Okay, you guys, take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.